This is a channel where we don't just discuss events, we dig into their hidden motives, underlying connections, and long-term consequences. Today, we turn our attention to China, to its stance on the war in Ukraine, and to a crucial question. Why is Beijing doing everything in its power to make sure Russia doesn't lose? Not because of friendship, not out of some sense of brotherhood, and certainly not because of any altruistic ideal, but because it's a calculated move, one that follows the cold logic of a strategic game. According to Western media, during word media, not out of some sense of brotherhood, and certainly not because of 7 media, and certainly not because word media. That was SIP, my media. Me word, Sefik word, me to Sef, we are with. We send, we are said, with sad. A recent closed-door meeting in Brussels, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi reportedly said, China will not allow Russia to lose the war against Ukraine, because that would give the US an opportunity to fully focus on China. This remark is often interpreted as a sign of loyalty to an ally. But in truth, it reveals something deeper and more important. Not support, but fear. Fear not for Russia, but for China itself. You see, China's position isn't rooted in compassion. It's grounded in realism, in strategy, in the cold arithmetic of geopolitics. A Russian defeat would disrupt one balance. A Russian victory would destabilize another. And for Beijing, balance, even a fragile one, is the foundation of its foreign policy. At first glance, it may seem that China and Russia are natural allies. They share a rivalry with the West, authoritarian power structures, and a desire to reshape the global order. But alliances between two ambitious, unequal powers are rarely stable. China may talk about partnership, but it has no desire to see a strong, victorious Russia. Why not? Because a Russian victory in Ukraine wouldn't just shift borders, it would shift ambitions. It would transform Moscow's posture, from defensive to offensive, from reactive to assertive. A Russia that wins the war would demand more say in global affairs, more control over post-Soviet space, especially in Central Asia, a region where China has invested heavily, quietly, and consistently for decades. Through loans, through roads and railways, through trade agreements, Beijing has slowly built influence across the region. But a newly emboldened Russia, riding high on victory, might challenge that. It would return to viewing Central Asia as its historical backyard, and then to authoritarian imperialisms. Would find themselves on a collision course. Beijing knows this, and that's why it fears not only Russia's collapse, but also its triumph. But collapse is no better. If Russia loses the war, the consequences won't end at the front line. They'll spill inward. Protests, crisis of legitimacy, fragmentation, especially in regions already detached from Moscow politically or culturally. A disintegrating Russia would create a geopolitical vacuum. And who would fill it? The West, the United States, NATO, the European Union, all the forces currently locked in with Ukraine would turn their attention north and east, toward the heart of Eurasia, and ultimately toward the Pacific, toward China. This would be a nightmare scenario for Beijing. Japan would expand its defense posture. South Korea would grow more militarized. Australia would deepen its security partnerships. And the US would shift resources, naval, economic, and strategic, to Asia. All of this would increase pressure on China from all directions. That's why for Beijing, Russia must not lose. Because if it does, the ripple effects could reach Chinese shores fast and hard. So what does Beijing really want? Not victory, not defeat, but a frozen war, an endless stalemate, a battlefield with no winners, just losers, a grinding war of attrition that consumes resources, attention, and momentum from both sides, Russia and the West. Because in this prolonged conflict, China plays a very different role, not as a combatant, but as a beneficiary. It supplies chips and machine tools, raw materials and components, logistics and support, often through third countries and under the radar. It props up Russia not to help it win, but to keep it from falling, not to resolve the war, but to make sure it never ends. Now imagine this. What if China suddenly stepped back? No more tech, no more trade, no more covert support, no more ruble reserves or gas and oil deals. The outcome? Almost certainly negotiations, and much earlier than today. A weakened Moscow would be forced to compromise, to preserve its institutions, to stop the bleeding, to avoid collapse. In other words, China could have prevented escalation. It could have pushed for peace, or at least a ceasefire. It could have saved lives, preserved structures, even prevented disintegration. But it didn't. And here's the irony. China's so-called support meant to prevent defeat may be what prolongs the war. It doesn't allow Russia to lose, but it also won't let it end the conflict. China is playing the long game, perhaps unconsciously, perhaps very consciously, a strategy of exhaustion, where Russia bleeds slowly until it's too weak to ever fully recover. And if disintegration does happen, it will be later and quieter, without fanfare, just the final silent collapse from within. And what will Beijing do then? Exactly what it always does. Act with patience and precision. It won't intervene openly, but it will step in subtly through new channels, by negotiating with successors, controlling key trade routes, offering loans, supplying goods. Its goal, to protect its influence, to prevent geopolitical realignment, to make sure the next regime, even if fragile, even if dependent, is at least not pro-American. China doesn't care about democracy. It cares about predictability, stability, control. Some still say China is Moscow's wise ally, but that's a myth. China is not an ally, it's a player. And Russia, just a piece on the chessboard, a piece that helps distract the West, weaken NATO, drain us and European budgets, sow divisions, and most importantly, by China, time to grow, time to prepare, time to move closer to its own grand objective, to shift the global balance of power, to erode U.S. leadership, and to build a world where China is the center. So when Wang Yi says Russia cannot lose, it's not diplomacy, it's not loyalty. It's a signal, a message. China doesn't want peace. It doesn't want Russia to win. It wants the war, a war with no end, a war with no winner. Because the longer it goes on, the better it is for Beijing. While others fight, China builds. While others die, China plans. While others spend, China gains. And here's the final question. While one side bleeds, another pays, and a third grows weary. Who is actually winning? China isn't fighting. It isn't sanctioned. It isn't burning through cash. It's in the shadows, but it's writing the script. And if things continue as they are, China, not Russia, not Ukraine, not the West, may emerge as the real winner of this war, without firing a shot, without risking a thing, but gaining everything. So maybe it's time for the West to stop thinking only about Russia, or even just about Ukraine, and start thinking about how not to lose to China. Because just because you don't see the director doesn't mean he's not running the show. Thank you for watching to the end. If you value independent analysis, free of propaganda and cliches, subscribe to this channel. We explore the essence, not the headlines. See you in the next video.